"You can't park here." The voice was flat, imbued with the kind of authority that comes from a uniform and a lack of imagination. It cut through the quiet hum of the concrete parking garage. The first thing Dr. Alistair Vance noticed was the hand. It rested on the black polymer grip of a holstered sidearm, a gesture that was meant to be casual but was anything but. It was a statement before the words were even finished. The security guard was young, but his eyes had the weary cynicism of a man much older. He stood between Alistair and his car, a gleaming black sedan that was cool to the touch even in the subterranean air. Bystanders, mostly nurses and residents finishing their shifts, slowed their steps. Phones, Alistair noted, were beginning to rise, their dark screens angled to capture the scene. Alistair Vance stood calm, unmoved. He did not look at the hand on the gun. He did not look at the smirking contempt that flickered at the edges of the guard's mouth. He simply held the man's gaze, his own expression unreadable. He had just finished a 9-hour surgery, a delicate dance of nerve and tissue that had saved a life, and the fatigue was a low thrum in his bones. But beneath the fatigue was something else, something forged over 62 years of life. A stillness. What the guard didn't know, what the rising phones couldn't capture, was that the man he was speaking to owned more than just the car. He didn't know that Dr. Vance had earned that specific parking spot 22 years ago, and that the brass plaque bolted to the concrete wall, reading Chief of Surgery, was not merely a title, but a testament. What the guard was about to learn was that some men are not defined by the moments others try to force upon them, but by the quiet, methodical response that follows. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The story began, as it so often did for Alistair, in the pre-dawn quiet. 4:30 a.m. The alarm didn't jolt him. It was a soft chime he had set to the precise frequency that nudged him from sleep without a trace of panic. He swung his legs out of bed, the motion fluid and practiced. The floorboards were cool beneath his feet. For a moment he stood in the darkness, listening to the gentle rhythm of his wife Evelyn's breathing beside him. 35 years of marriage had synchronized their lives in ways that still felt like a quiet miracle. He moved through the house with a practiced economy of motion, a habit from decades of navigating sterile operating rooms where one errant step could mean disaster. In the kitchen, the quality of light was still a deep, inky blue, the world outside just beginning to think about morning. He didn't turn on the overheads. A small lamp above the counter cast a warm, focused glow. The air smelled of yesterday's cinnamon and the faint, clean scent of the lemon oil Evelyn used on the wooden countertops. This was his time, his ritual. The coffee beans, a dark roast from Ethiopia, were measured into the grinder, not by a scoop, but by weight. 22 grams, precisely. The sound of the grinder was a brief, violent roar that shattered the silence, but to Alistair it was the sound of the day beginning its engine. He poured the hot water over the grounds in a slow, deliberate spiral, watching the bloom, the release of carbon dioxide that looked like the earth itself taking a deep breath. He had learned a long time ago that mastery in any field, whether surgery or coffee making, was about controlling the variables: water temperature, grind size, pour speed. It was all a form of discipline. He took his first sip standing at the window, looking out over the manicured lawn of their suburban home. The sky was turning a soft gray at the horizon. He let himself feel it for exactly 3 minutes. The warmth of the mug in his hands, the rich, slightly bitter taste of the coffee, the profound peace of a world still asleep. Then he placed the mug in the sink, and the process of becoming Dr. Vance began. He showered and dressed not in scrubs, but in a perfectly pressed shirt and tailored trousers. The scrubs would come later, a uniform for a different kind of battle. For the drive, for the walk through the halls, for the first meetings of the day, he wore his own clothes. It was a small but significant act of asserting his identity beyond the hospital walls. He was Alistair Vance, husband, father, man who loved good coffee, before he was the chief of surgery. He chose a tie, a muted silk paisley, and knotted it with the same precision he used for his surgical sutures. At 5:15 a.m., he kissed Evelyn's forehead. She stirred, her hand finding his. "Be careful," she murmured, a ritual phrase that meant everything from drive safely to don't let the world wear you down. "Always," he whispered back. The drive to Unity General Hospital was 25 minutes with no traffic. He didn't listen to the news. He didn't listen to talk radio. He listened to Bach's cello suites. The music was structured, mathematical, yet deeply emotional. It mirrored the way his own mind worked. Logic and feeling intertwined. He drove the black sedan with a light touch, the engine a low, powerful hum. The car was a gift to himself 5 years ago, when he paid off the last of his daughter's medical school loans. It was not a flashy car, but it was a good one. Solid. Reliable. Like him. He entered the hospital staff parking garage at 5:41 a.m. The structure was a vast concrete ribcage, mostly empty at this hour. He didn't need to look for a spot. He had one. On the second level, a short walk from the direct entrance to the surgical wing. He'd been assigned this spot when he was promoted to chief of surgery. It was one of the few true perks of the job, more valuable than the corner office with the view of the city. It saved him 10 minutes every morning and every evening, minutes that added up to hours, to days, time he could spend with Evelyn, or reading, or simply being still. The plaque was there, just as it had been for 2 decades. Polished brass, slightly tarnished by the damp garage air. The letters were engraved deep. Chief of Surgery. Beneath it, reserved at all times. Simple. Final. He backed the sedan into the space, the rear tires bumping gently against the concrete stop. He turned off the engine. The cello suite ended. The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds. Just the road and the engine and the morning air. He gathered his briefcase, locked the car, and walked toward the hospital doors. He felt the familiar sense of purpose settle over him. This was his place. He had earned it. He had built a life, a career, a legacy within these walls. He was home. The day unfolded with its usual controlled chaos. A morning briefing with the surgical residents, a review of the upcoming caseload, 2 consultations with patients and their anxious families. Alistair moved through it all with a calm that many mistook for detachment. It wasn't detachment, it was focus. He had learned that in the operating room, panic was a contagion. Calm was a shield. He spoke in measured, complete sentences. He listened more than he talked. He had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and safe, whether they were a terrified patient or a first-year resident. His hands, when he demonstrated a technique on a teaching model, were steady and sure. They were large hands, but they moved with an impossible grace. These were the hands that had repaired congenital heart defects in infants, that had removed tumors from the delicate tissues of the brain, that had reconstructed faces and limbs shattered by trauma. They were hands that knew the geography of the human body better than he knew the streets of his own city. They were tools of immense skill, but also instruments of profound compassion. Around noon, he took a call from his daughter, Maya, also a doctor, currently completing her residency in pediatrics in another state. They talked about her caseload, a difficult diagnosis she was struggling with. He didn't give her the answer. He asked her questions, leading her down the path of inquiry until she arrived at the conclusion herself. "You got it, Maya," he said, a smile in his voice. "Trust your training. Trust your gut." "Thanks, Dad," she said, the relief in her voice palpable. "I miss you." "I miss you too. Come home for Thanksgiving." "Wouldn't miss it." That call was the anchor in his day, a reminder of the why. He fought for the lives of strangers, but he had built a life for his family. The two were inextricably linked. His work was an extension of his love for them, a way of putting his values into practice in the world. He ate his lunch at his desk, a simple salad and a piece of grilled chicken Evelyn had packed for him. He read a journal article on a new laparoscopic technique while he ate. 20 minutes, efficient, restorative. The main event of his day was scheduled for 1 p.m., a complex aortic valve replacement on a 78-year-old man named Mr. Henderson. The man's chances were not good, but he had a granddaughter getting married in the fall, and he was determined to walk her down the aisle. Alistair had met with him 3 times. He'd seen the photo of the granddaughter. He felt the weight of that promise. Before he scrubbed in, he had his own ritual. He would stand in his office for 2 minutes and look at a single frame photograph on his desk. It was a picture of his father, standing in front of the small barber shop he had owned for 40 years. His father was wearing a crisp white shirt, his hands in his pockets, a look of quiet, unyielding dignity on his face. He had worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, to make sure his son could go to college, to medical school. He never complained. He just did the work. Alistair would touch the glass over his father's face. "Okay, Dad," he'd whisper. "Let's go to work." The surgery was a marathon. 9 hours of intense, focused concentration. The operating room was a world unto itself. The steady beep of the heart monitor, the quiet request for instruments, the low hum of the machines. Alistair was the conductor of this orchestra. Every person, every tool, had its part to play. There were complications, an unexpected bleed, a moment when the patient's blood pressure dropped precipitously. Alistair never raised his voice. "More suction," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Let's get some pressure on that. Stay with me, people." He talked to the patient, even though the man was under deep anesthesia. "All right, Mr. Henderson. Just a little turbulence. We're flying through it. You're doing great." His team, who had worked with him for years, responded to his calm. They moved with renewed focus, their own anxieties quelled by his composure. They controlled the bleed. They stabilized the pressure. They finished the replacement. As he placed the final suture, he knew it was a success. He looked at the clock. 10:12 p.m. He stepped back from the table, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice hoarse. He did a final check on the patient, spoke with the anesthesiologist, and then left the OR. He stripped off his scrubs, the fabric heavy with sweat, and took a quick shower in the doctor's lounge. He felt the deep, satisfying ache of a job well done. Mr. Henderson would likely make that wedding. He dressed back in his street clothes, the fabric feeling clean and civilized against his skin. He packed his briefcase, turned off his office light, and started the long walk to the parking garage. The hospital was quieter now, the daytime bustle replaced by the hushed efficiency of the night shift. He nodded at the nurses he passed. He saw a young woman in nursing student scrubs, leaning against a wall near the garage entrance, looking exhausted. He recognized her from the surgical floor. He gave her a small, encouraging smile. She looked up, surprised, and smiled back. He pushed open the heavy steel door to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and car exhaust. The sound of his leather-soled shoes echoed in the cavernous space. He saw his car, a familiar silhouette under the fluorescent lights, and he saw the man standing in front of it. That was when the flat voice cut through the quiet hum. "You can't park here?" Alistair stopped. He was about 20 feet away. He looked at the man. The uniform, the badge that read Miller, the hand resting on the holstered weapon. He looked past him to the brass plaque on the wall. He felt the exhaustion in his bones curdle into something else. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, a weary resignation. He had learned a long time ago that his title, his accomplishments, the white coat he sometimes wore, were invisible to certain people. To them, he was just a black man in a place they felt he shouldn't be. "This is my assigned parking space," Alistair said, his voice even. He took a slow step forward, holding his hospital ID badge up. The plastic card glinted in the harsh light. The guard, Miller, didn't look at the badge. He smirked. "A lot of people say that. This spot's for the chief of surgery. I know for a fact he's a white guy, an older fella." The statement hung in the air, thick and ugly. Alistair felt the weight of dozens of eyes. The nursing student he had smiled at was now watching from the doorway, her phone held loosely at her side. A few other people leaving for the night had stopped to observe. A performance was beginning, and he was the unwilling star. "I am the chief of surgery," Alistair stated. It was a fact, plain and simple. He held out his ID again. "My name is Dr. Alistair Vance. You can read it right here." Miller took a step closer, crowding Alistair's space. It was a classic intimidation tactic. He was shorter than Alistair, but stockier, with a belligerent set to his jaw. "I don't need to read your fake ID. I know who's who around here. You people think you can get away with anything. Now, I'm going to tell you one more time. Move your vehicle, or I'm having it towed." "The vehicle is not on," Alistair said, his calmness a stark contrast to the guard's escalating aggression. "I am standing right here. There's no need to have it towed. If you believe there is a misunderstanding, you can call your supervisor. We can verify my identity in about 30 seconds. This was the wrong thing to say. Offering a logical solution was seen as a challenge. Miller's face flushed a deep red. "Oh, you're telling me how to do my job now? I don't need to call anyone. I have the authority to make this call myself." He unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "This is Miller at Garage B, Level 2. I need a tow for a black sedan. License plate? He read the plate number off Alistair's car. In a restricted spot. Driver is on scene and being non-compliant. Non-compliant? The word was a weapon. It was a label that could justify anything that happened next. Alistair knew this. He made a conscious decision. He would comply physically while asserting his rights verbally. He took a small step back, creating space. His hands held open at his sides where they could be clearly seen. For the record, Alistair said, his voice loud enough for the onlookers to hear clearly, it is 10:28 p.m. I am Dr. Alistair Vance, the chief of surgery at this hospital. This is my assigned parking space. I have presented my hospital identification, which Officer Miller has refused to examine. He is calling for a tow against my objections and without verifying the facts. Miller sneered. Make all the records you want. It's not going to stop that truck. From the corner of his eye, Alistair saw the nursing student, Sarah, lift her phone. The small red light of the recording function was unmistakable. She was holding it steady. Alistair met her eyes for a fraction of a second and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a transfer of responsibility, a request. Hold this. Trust the process. Her expression firm with resolve. The next 9 minutes were a masterclass in humiliation, delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. The tow truck, which must have been lurking nearby like a vulture, arrived with astonishing speed. Its yellow light strobed across the concrete walls, painting the scene in a sickly, urgent glow. The driver was a heavy-set man who didn't make eye contact with anyone. He went about his work with a practiced indifference. Miller stood by, arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He was performing for his audience. This is what happens when you challenge me. This is what happens when you don't know your place. Alistair did not argue with the tow truck driver. It wasn't his fault. He was just a cog in the machine that Miller had set in motion. Instead, Alistair stood perfectly still and watched. He watched the driver attach the hooks to the undercarriage of his sedan. He heard the sickening groan of metal as the winch began to tighten, lifting the front wheels of his car off the ground. The car he had bought to celebrate a milestone. The car he drove while listening to Bach. It looked violated, helpless. He felt a hot surge of anger, a primal urge to shout, to intervene, to physically stop this injustice. He felt it rise in his chest like a fever. He let himself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. He pictured his father, standing in front of his barbershop. Dignity, composure, strategic intelligence. Then he let the anger recede, replaced by a cold, clear focus. This was not a battle to be won by shouting in a parking garage. This was a war to be won with precision and evidence. He pulled out his own phone. He took a picture of the tow truck hoisting his car. He took a picture of Miller, who posed for it with a smirk. He took a picture of the brass plaque on the wall. He recorded a short video narrating the facts. The time is now 10:37 p.m. My vehicle is being illegally towed from my assigned parking space at Unity General Hospital at the direction of Officer Miller, badge number 714. The car was finally secured, its front end lifted awkwardly in the air. The tow truck driver got back in his cab. Miller walked over to Alistair, his hand once again resting on his sidearm. You'll have to go to the impound lot on 54th Street to get it back. Cash only, he said, the words dripping with satisfaction. Maybe next time you'll learn to follow the rules. Then he turned and walked away, his duty done. The tow truck rumbled to life and began to pull away, dragging Alistair's sedan behind it. The yellow lights swept across the garage one last time and then were gone. The small crowd of onlookers dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves. They had seen the show, and now it was over. They had their own lives to get back to. Only the nursing student, Sarah, remained. She lowered her phone, her face pale. She looked at Alistair, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and outrage. Dr. Vance, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I got it on video. All of it. Alistair walked over to her. He looked not at her phone, but at her face. What is your name? He asked, his voice gentle. Sarah Jenkins. I'm a second-year nursing student. Sarah Jenkins, he repeated, committing the name to memory. Thank you. What you did was very brave. I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to hold on to that video. Don't post it. Don't send it to anyone. Just keep it safe. Can you do that? She nodded, clutching the phone to her chest. Yes, sir, of course. Good, he said. Now go home and get some rest. You've had a long day. He gave her another small, reassuring smile and then turned away. He was alone now. In the space where his car had been, there was only a dark stain of oil on the concrete. He looked at the brass plaque. Chief of Surgery. He felt the full weight of the humiliation settle upon him. It was a physical sensation, a cold heaviness in his gut. They had taken his car. They had questioned his identity. They had treated him like a criminal in the very place he had dedicated his life to healing people. He took a deep breath, the damp garage air filling his lungs. He could call the hospital administrator on call. He could call the CEO. He could raise hell and have his car returned within the hour. But that would be a victory for him, Alistair Vance. It wouldn't address the root of the problem. It wouldn't stop Officer Miller from doing this to someone else tomorrow. Someone who wasn't the chief of surgery. Someone who didn't have his resources. A janitor? A food service worker? A patient's family member? No. This required a different approach. The machine itself was broken, and you couldn't fix a machine by yelling at one of its gears. You had to dismantle it, examine its parts, and rebuild it correctly. He took out his phone and called a taxi. While he waited, he sent a single text message to his wife. Running late. Car trouble. Home soon. Love you. The taxi ride home was silent. The driver, a man from Haiti, had a rosary hanging from his rearview mirror. Alistair watched the city lights slide by, the familiar streets looking alien and hostile. He paid the driver and walked up the stone path to his front door. The house was dark except for the warm glow of the porch light. He opened the door and Evelyn was there, waiting for him in the foyer. She was in her robe, her arms crossed. She hadn't been waiting in the dark. She had turned on the light the moment she heard the taxi. She looked at his face, and her expression softened from worry to a deep, knowing sadness. She didn't need anyone to tell her what had happened. She had seen this look on his face before, at different times, in different places, over 35 years. The look of a dignified man who had been forced to endure an indignity. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms, and he stepped into them. He buried his face in her shoulder, the scent of her lotion, a familiar mix of lavender and chamomile, filling his senses. He was not a man who leaned on others easily, but in her arms, he let the full weight of his exhaustion and humiliation rest upon him. He let himself be held. They towed the car, he said, his voice muffled by her robe. I'll make you some tea, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. It was her way of taking care of him, of restoring a small piece of order to a world that had become chaotic. He sat at the kitchen table while she boiled the water, the same table where they had shared thousands of meals, where they had helped their daughter with her homework, where they had planned their future. It was the heart of their home. She placed a steaming mug in front of him. Chamomile. She knew he wouldn't be able to sleep otherwise. She sat across from him, her hand covering his on the smooth wooden surface. Tell me everything, she said. And so he did. He recounted the entire incident, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He was a surgeon describing a procedure, the facts laid out in order, the guard's words, the refusal to check his ID, the call for the tow truck, the onlookers, the student with the camera, the final, smug dismissal. When he finished, the silence in the kitchen was profound. Evelyn's grip on his hand tightened. What are you going to do? She asked. Alistair looked at her, and for the first time that night, a flicker of the fire he kept so carefully banked showed in his eyes. I'm going to take 21 days of leave, he said. It was the full amount he had accrued for the year. He had been planning to use it for a trip to Italy with her. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. 21 days? Alistair, you haven't taken more than a week off in a decade. I know, he said. He took a sip of the tea. It was warm and soothing. But this isn't about a car, Evelyn. If it were just a car, I'd make a phone call. This is about the assumption, the disrespect, the fact that a man with a badge and a gun can look at me in my own place of work and decide I don't belong. The system that allows him to do that, that protects him when he does it, has to be addressed. He looked at his hands, the surgeon's hands, resting on the table. I'm going to take 21 days, he repeated, and I'm going to dedicate them to dissecting this rot. I'm going to do it methodically. I'm going to do it with precision, and I am going to remove it. Evelyn studied his face. She saw the exhaustion, but beneath it, she saw the unshakable resolve she had fallen in love with all those years ago. She saw the man who had worked his way through medical school against all odds, the surgeon who took on the hopeless cases, the father who had taught their daughter to believe in herself. She squeezed his hand. "Okay," she said. "Where do we start?" The next morning, Alistair woke up at 4:30 a.m., his internal clock indifferent to the fact that he was on leave. He went through his coffee ritual, the familiar steps grounding him. But instead of dressing for the hospital, he put on a simple pair of jeans and a polo shirt. At 8 a.m., he called the chief of medicine, Dr. Annabelle Lee, a colleague and friend for 15 years, and informed her he was taking an immediate personal leave of 21 days. He offered no explanation beyond a serious personal matter, and she, knowing him, did not press. He then delegated his duties to his deputy chief. The machine of the surgical department would run without him. His first official act was to file a formal complaint. He didn't use an online portal. He drove Evelyn's car to the hospital's administration building, a separate complex from the main hospital. He walked into the office of the private security firm that the hospital contracted with, a company called Sterling Security Solutions. The office was sterile and impersonal, with gray walls and posters espousing values like integrity and vigilance. The man he was directed to was named Arthur Barrows. He was the regional supervisor, Miller's direct superior. Barrows was a man in his late 50s with a military-style haircut and a paunch that strained the buttons of his white shirt. He had the performative hardiness of a salesman. He greeted Alistair with a firm handshake and a wide smile, gesturing for him to sit. "Dr. Vance, a pleasure. I was so sorry to hear about the misunderstanding last night," Barrows said, his tone suggesting it was a minor clerical error. "We got your vehicle back from the impound lot first thing this morning. It's in your spot, safe and sound. We even had it detailed for you. No charge, of course. We've waived all the fees." Alistair sat, placing his briefcase on his lap. He did not return the smile. "Mr. Barrows, I appreciate the return of my property. However, what happened last night was not a misunderstanding. It was an act of targeted harassment and abuse of authority by one of your officers." Barrows' smile tightened. "Doctor, those are strong words. Officer Miller is one of our best. Ex-military, a 12-year veteran with a spotless record. He was simply following protocol. That spot is highly sensitive, and he was instructed to be extra vigilant." "Was his protocol to refuse to look at my hospital-issued identification?" Alistair asked, his voice quiet. "According to his report," Barrows said, tapping a folder on his desk, "you were agitated. You refused to show him ID and became verbally aggressive. He felt the situation was escalating and made a judgment call to de-escalate by removing the property in question." Alistair felt a cold, calm clarity settle over him. So, the story was already written. The false report filed preemptively. This was the machine in action. It wasn't just designed to protect the powerful. It was designed to exhaust the wronged until they gave up. "Mr. Barrows, every single statement you just made is false," Alistair said. He opened his briefcase and took out a single sheet of paper. It was his formal complaint, typed and printed. It detailed the events of the previous night with chronological precision, including the exact times and Officer Miller's badge number. "I would like to submit this for your official review. I would also like a copy of Officer Miller's report that you just referenced." Barrows glanced at the paper without taking it. "Of course, you're entitled to file a complaint. We'll add it to the file. But as for Officer Miller's report, that's an internal personnel document. I'm not at liberty to share that." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Look, Doctor, let's be reasonable. It was late. You were tired after a long surgery. He was at the end of a long shift. Wires got crossed. We've apologized. We've returned your car. We've made it right. What more is there to do? We can have a conversation with Miller about his communication style, but a formal investigation seems excessive. That was the offer. Go away quietly. Accept the apology. Let the system reset." "What's excessive," Alistair replied, his voice still level, "is having my car towed from my own parking space while being publicly humiliated. What's excessive is your officer lying on an official report to cover his actions. I am not looking for a conversation. I am looking for accountability." Barrows' friendly facade finally cracked. Something moved behind his eyes. Annoyance, contempt. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice now cold and official, we consider this matter closed. We have reviewed the incident and found that Officer Miller acted within the bounds of company policy. If you wish to pursue this further, you'll need to do so through your own legal counsel. It was a dismissal, a threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. Alistair stood up. He placed his printed complaint on the edge of Barrows' desk. The matter is not closed, Mr. Barrows, not by a long shot. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the paper sitting there like an unanswered question. He had 20 days of leave remaining. That afternoon, he received a phone call from an unknown number. Is this Dr. Vance? The voice on the other end asked. It was a woman's voice, elderly but firm. This is he? My name is Eleanor Peters. I was the head of nursing administration at Unity General for 30 years. I retired in 2015. I heard about what happened to you in the parking garage. The hospital grapevine, Alistair thought. The fastest communication network known to man. Mrs. Peters, he said, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I remember you. You ran a tight ship. She chuckled, a dry rustling sound. I tried. Listen, Dr. Vance, I'm calling because what happened to you is not new. That boy, Miller, and others like him, they've been doing this for years. Little cuts, small humiliations, always aimed at people they think can't fight back. Janitors, kitchen staff, patients' families, mostly black and brown folks. I used to get the complaints. I'd send them up the chain, and they would just disappear. Alistair felt a familiar stirring of interest. This was more than just an anecdote. What did you do with the complaints, Mrs. Peters? The official ones vanished, she said. But I'm a nurse. We document everything. I kept my own copies. I have notes, dates, names, incidents. For the last 10 years of my career, I kept a private file. I called it my Injustice Archive. It's just been sitting in my study, collecting dust. I always thought one day it might be useful. There was a pause. I think today is that day. Would you be willing to come to my home? I think you should see it. An hour later, Alistair was sitting in Eleanor Peters' living room. It was a cozy space filled with books and photographs of children and grandchildren. Mrs. Peters was a small woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a ramrod-straight posture. She placed a large, heavy cardboard box on the coffee table between them. The words Injustice Archive were written on the side in black marker. This is it, she said. She opened the lid. The box was filled with meticulously organized manila folders. Each one was labeled with a date and a name. She pulled one out. January 2012. Marcus Green, a porter. His car was booted in the staff lot by Miller. Claimed he was parked in a fire lane. He wasn't. Cost him $200 to get the boot off. He filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Barrows was the supervisor then, too. She pulled out another. June 2014. Maria Flores, a cafeteria worker, accused of stealing hospital property by a guard named Henderson. They searched her bag in the main lobby, in front of everyone. They found nothing. She was so ashamed, she quit the next week. Another and another. The stories piled up. A litany of petty cruelties and systemic neglect. There were at least 30 folders in the box. 12 of them involved Officer Miller. 5 involved illegal toes or boots. All of them had been dismissed by Arthur Barrows. It was a pattern, undeniable and meticulously documented. The box of evidence. Alistair looked at the folders, at the years of patient, thankless work Mrs. Peters had put into compiling them. This wasn't just a box of old papers. This was the foundation of his case. It transformed his personal grievance into a class action crusade. Mrs. Peters, he said, his voice thick with emotion, this is extraordinary. It's just what nurses do, doctor, she said simply. We watch, we listen, and we write it down. We know that the little symptoms can be a sign of a much bigger disease. She looked him in the eye. The question is, now that you have the diagnosis, are you the one who has the stomach to perform the surgery? Alistair looked from the box of evidence to the determined face of the retired nurse. He felt the last vestiges of his personal anger fall away, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. This was no longer about his car or his pride. It was about Marcus Green and Maria Flores and all the others whose stories were filed away in this box. Yes, Mrs. Peters, he said, I am. He had 19 days of leave remaining. The next day, Alistair convened a meeting in his home study. He had spent the previous night scanning every document from Eleanor Peters' archive, creating a digital and a physical copy. The originals were placed in a fireproof safe. Present at the meeting were two people. The first was Evelyn, his anchor, who sat quietly with a legal pad, ready to take notes. Her presence was non-negotiable. The second was Jessica Riley, the general counsel for Unity General Hospital. Jessica was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in her early 40s. She was a black woman who had fought her way to the top of a field dominated by white men. She and Alistair had a relationship built on mutual respect. He admired her intellect and integrity. She admired his skill and unwavering ethical compass. He had called her not as Doctor Vance the employee, but as Alistair Vance the man, and asked her to come to his home. He laid it all out for her, his own incident in detail, the confrontation with Barrows, the lie about the spotless record. And then he brought out the box. He walked her through the archive, folder by folder. He showed her the pattern of abuse, the consistent presence of Miller and Barrows, and the systematic dismissal of every single complaint. Jessica listened, her expression growing more grim with each folder. She was a professional ally, driven by genuine conviction, and she recognized the legal and moral catastrophe laid out before her. She read the notes, the dates, the names. She saw the machine at work. When he was done, she sat back, her pen tapping a rapid rhythm on her notepad. "This is bad, Alistair," she said. "This is much worse than one rogue guard. This is a pattern in practice. Sterling Security is our contractor, but this happened on our property. We have exposure here, significant exposure." "I know," Alistair said. "That's why I called you. This isn't just about Sterling. It's about the hospital's complicity in allowing this to happen for a decade." "Barrow's behavior is the key," Jessica said, her legal mind already dissecting the problem. "His deliberate dismissal of these complaints constitutes a cover-up. It's not just negligence, it's active concealment. That elevates this from a series of personnel issues to a potential corporate conspiracy." She looked at Alistair. "What do you want?" It was the most important question. "I want three things," Alistair said, his voice precise. "First, accountability. For Officer Miller, for Supervisor Barrows, and for Sterling Security as a company. Real consequences, not just a conversation. Second, restitution. Not for me, but for every person in this box who was wronged. Their fines returned, their names cleared, a formal apology. Third, and most important, systemic reform. I want a new system of oversight for hospital security, one with real teeth and community involvement. I want to ensure this can never happen again." He hadn't mentioned money for himself. He hadn't threatened a lawsuit. He had laid out a plan for justice. Jessica's respect for him deepened. "This archive is powerful," she said, gesturing to the box, "but it's historical. Barrows will claim he was following procedure, that the complaints lacked merit. It's their word against the word of people they've already dismissed as unreliable. To break this open, we need something current, something undeniable." "The video," Alistair said. "There's a nursing student, Sarah Jenkins. She recorded my entire encounter with Miller." Jessica's eyes lit up. "A video? That changes everything. That's the turning point. We need to get it." "She's a student, Jessica," Alistair cautioned. "She's young, she's vulnerable. I told her to hold on to it, but I haven't asked her for it yet. I don't want her to face retaliation." "You're right," Jessica said, nodding. "We have to handle this delicately. You should be the one to approach her. She trusts you. Assure her that the hospital's legal department will protect her from any form of retaliation, academic or otherwise. Put it in writing. I'll draft the letter." The plan was taking shape. The archive was the foundation. The video was the battering ram. Later that day, Alistair found Sarah Jenkins in the hospital library. She was hunched over a thick textbook, a highlighter in her hand. When she saw him, she straightened up, a look of apprehension on her face. "Dr. Vance," she said. "Sarah," he said warmly, "may I have a word?" They found a quiet corner. Alistair explained the situation. He told her about the archive, about the other victims, about the plan to hold Sterling Security accountable. He didn't pressure her. He simply laid out the facts. "The video you took," he said, "is the single most important piece of evidence we have. It can corroborate everything, but I will not ask you for it unless you are willing to provide it, and I will not let you do it without protection." He handed her the letter Jessica had drafted. It was on official hospital letterhead, signed by the General Counsel, guaranteeing her full and unconditional protection from any and all retaliation from any party, including hospital staff, faculty, and third-party contractors. Sarah read the letter, her eyes scanning the legal language. She looked from the letter to Alistair's steady, reassuring face. He wasn't just a chief of surgery. He was a figure of immense moral authority within the hospital. He was a man people trusted. "They shouldn't have done that to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with remembered anger. "It was wrong." She took a deep breath. "You can have the video, Dr. Vance. I'll email it to you right now." She took out her phone, her fingers tapping on the screen. A moment later, Alistair's phone buzzed. The file had arrived. He looked at the young woman in front of him, at the courage in her eyes. She was the witness, the one who had refused to look away. "Thank you, Sarah," he said. "You have no idea how much this means." "Just make them pay," she said, a hard edge to her voice. "That's the plan," Alistair replied. He had 18 days of leave remaining. The video was as damning as he had remembered. The quality was clear. The audio was crisp. It captured everything. Miller's initial belligerence, Alistair's calm and repeated attempts to show his ID Miller's explicit refusal to look at it, his false claim over the radio about noncompliance, his smug satisfaction as the car was towed. It was an objective, irrefutable record of the event, and it systematically dismantled the lies in Miller's official report. Jessica Riley watched it in Alistair's study, her face a mask of cold fury. "He's done," she said when it was over. "Miller is finished. Barrows is finished. This is the smoking gun." But she knew it wasn't enough to just have the evidence. It had to be deployed strategically. A direct confrontation with Barrows would just allow him to circle the wagons and prepare his defense. They needed to go higher up the food chain, but to do that, they needed to connect Barrows' cover-up to a motive. Why would he consistently protect a problematic officer like Miller? Was it laziness, cronyism, or something more? The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, Jessica received an anonymous interoffice envelope. Inside was a USB stick and a single typed note. "Arthur Barrows has a side deal. Check the invoices. An employee who believes in Unity General's real mission." It was the insider. Someone within the corrupt institution who had been waiting for the right moment to come forward. Jessica plugged the USB stick into a secure air-gapped laptop in her office. It contained a trove of documents, internal emails from Sterling Security's corporate office, financial records, copies of invoices submitted to the hospital. It took her and a forensic accountant from her team a full day to piece it together. The picture that emerged was one of calculated systemic fraud. Sterling Security Solutions had a bonus structure for its regional supervisors. The bonus was tied to keeping client-reported incidents, especially those with a high risk of litigation, like accusations of discrimination, below a certain threshold. Every complaint that Barrows successfully dismissed without it escalating to the hospital's legal or HR departments added to his quarterly bonus. The emails were explicit. Barrows corresponded with a man named Robert Fletcher, a vice president at Sterling. They discussed managing down the incident reports. Fletcher praised Barrows for his ability to handle these things in-house and protect the client from unnecessary headaches. Miller was mentioned several times as an officer who generated a lot of noise, but whom Barrows was skilled at buffering. The motive was clear. It wasn't just about protecting his man. It was about money. Barrows wasn't just a bad manager. He was a co-conspirator in a scheme to defraud the hospital. Unity General was paying Sterling Security for a service, professional, unbiased security that it was not receiving. Instead, they were paying to have legitimate complaints buried, increasing their own liability, all so Barrows could collect a bonus. Robert Fletcher, the VP, was the systemic enabler, the man who had designed the machine to function this way. Jessica Riley felt a thrill of victory. This was it. This was the key that unlocked everything. She now had Barrows not just on a pattern of racial discrimination and covering for his subordinates, but on a clear-cut case of financial fraud against the hospital. That was a language the hospital board and the CEO would understand perfectly. She called Alistair. "We've got him," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "We've got Barrows, and we've got his boss at Sterling. The whole house of cards is coming down. What's the next step? Alistair asked. I'm scheduling a meeting with CEO Thompson for tomorrow morning, Jessica replied. You, me, and him, no one else. We're going to present him with the full package. Your incident, the video, Mrs. Peters' archive, and the evidence of financial fraud. We're not giving him a choice. He either acts decisively to clean house, or we go public with everything. The reputation of this hospital will be in his hands. The turning point had arrived. The power dynamic had shifted, completely and irreversibly. The quiet, methodical counterattack was about to become a full frontal assault. Alistair hung up the phone. He walked into the living room where Evelyn was reading. He sat down beside her. He didn't say anything, but she could see the change in him. The weight he had been carrying for the past week had lifted, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. It's time, he said. She closed her book and took his hand. I know, she said. Your father would be proud. He looked at her, his heart full. I have 15 days of leave remaining, he said. I think I might not need them all. The meeting took place at 9 a.m. in the expansive top-floor office of CEO Mark Thompson. Thompson was a man who lived in a world of spreadsheets and donor relations. He was more of a businessman than a healthcare administrator, a fact that had often been a point of quiet contention for doctors like Alistair. He greeted Alistair with a concerned, slightly confused look. Alistair, good to see you. I was sorry to hear you were on leave. Is everything all right? That's what we're here to discuss, Mark, Alistair said, his use of the first name, a subtle signal that this was not a subordinate addressing a superior. Jessica Riley did the talking. She was in her element, a master of controlled revelation. She began with Alistair's story, a calm, factual retelling. Then she played the video on a large monitor on the CEO's wall. Thompson watched, his face growing paler with every second. He saw the chief of his surgical department being humiliated, his identity dismissed, his property illegally seized. He saw the smug look on Miller's face. This is unacceptable, Thompson stammered when it was over. This guard, Miller, he'll be fired. Today. I'll see to it personally. It's not about one guard, Mark, Jessica said, her voice cutting through his attempt to find a quick solution. She then produced a summary of Eleanor Peters' archive. She didn't overwhelm him with all 30 files. She presented a single page, a chart showing the names, the dates, and the outcomes. A long list of incidents, all culminating in the same word, dismissed. Supervisor Arthur Barrow's name was next to every single one. Thompson stared at the chart. I had no idea, he whispered. This is a pattern. It is, Jessica confirmed, and this is the reason for it. She then presented the evidence of the fraud. The emails between Barrows and the Sterling VP, Robert Fletcher, the explanation of the bonus structure, the invoices. She laid out a clear, undeniable case of a contractor defrauding the hospital and systematically covering up discriminatory behavior for financial gain. The room was silent. Thompson looked from the evidence on his desk to Alistair's stony face to Jessica's uncompromising expression. He was trapped. The legal exposure was massive. The reputational damage if this went public would be catastrophic. His career was on the line. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. It was the same question Jessica had asked Alistair, but coming from Thompson, it sounded like a plea. This time, Alistair answered. We want what you should have wanted the moment you saw that video, Mark. We want justice and reform. He laid out the 3 points he had formulated with Jessica. 1. Accountability. The immediate termination of Officer Miller and Supervisor Barrows. Furthermore, the hospital was to terminate its multi-million-dollar contract with Sterling Security Solutions, effective immediately, for cause, citing fraud and gross negligence, and they would pursue legal action against Sterling to recoup damages. He also insisted that a formal criminal complaint be filed against Miller for illegal towing and filing a false report, and against Barrows for his role in the fraud. 2. Restitution. The hospital would create a fund to locate and compensate every individual documented in Mrs. Peters' archive and any others who came forward. This would be handled by a third-party administrator, and each victim would receive a formal, written apology from the CEO's office. 3. Systemic reform. The hospital would dissolve its relationship with private security contractors and build its own in-house security force. The hiring and training for this new force would be completely overhauled, with a focus on de-escalation, cultural competency, and community engagement. Crucially, a permanent civilian oversight board would be established, co-chaired by a hospital board member and a community leader, with the power to independently investigate all complaints against security personnel. Thompson listened, his head in his hands. It was a complete and total overhaul. It would be expensive, complicated, and politically difficult. But he had no choice. Jessica and Alistair had built a case so airtight that to refuse would be an act of institutional suicide. "Okay," Thompson said, finally looking up. His face was ashen. "Okay, we'll do it, all of it." Jessica Riley slid a pre-drafted document across the desk. "Then you'll sign this," she said. It was a legally binding agreement, a memorandum of understanding, committing the hospital to every single point. Thompson read it. He picked up a pen, his hand shaking slightly, and signed his name. The counterattack was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The fallout was swift and precise. It moved with the speed of a surgical incision. That same afternoon, Arthur Barrows was summoned to a meeting with HR and CEO Thompson. He walked in with his usual confident swagger, likely assuming it was a formality to discuss the unfortunate Vance incident. He was wrong. Jessica Riley was also in the room. Thompson did the talking, his voice cold and clipped. He informed Barrows that his actions constituted a flagrant violation of his duties and a fraudulent conspiracy against the hospital. He was terminated, effective immediately. His face went from confusion to disbelief to a blotchy purple rage. He started to bluster, to threaten, but Jessica cut him off. "I wouldn't say another word without a lawyer, Mr. Barrows," she advised coolly. "We have everything. The emails, the invoices, the testimony, everything." Barrows deflated. The fight went out of him, replaced by the clammy fear of a man who has been caught. He was told to clean out his desk and was then escorted from the building by two senior hospital administrators, his personal effects in a cardboard box. The cowardice when challenged, a core trait Alistair had noted, was on full display. Next was Miller. He was called in at the end of his shift. He sauntered into the small office, a smirk on his face. He likely expected a slap on the wrist, maybe a "be more careful next time" chat. Instead, he was met by the same team, HR, Thompson, and Jessica. He was fired. When he was told the reason, gross misconduct, dishonesty, and abuse of authority in the incident involving Dr. Vance. His smirk vanished. "You're firing me over that?" "It was a simple mistake. The guy didn't have ID. "We have the video, Mr. Miller," Jessica said quietly. "The one where you refused to look at his ID multiple times." Miller's face went white. He knew in that moment that he was utterly and completely ruined. Like Barrows, he was made to pack his belongings and was escorted out. But Alistair and Jessica had insisted on more than just termination. As Miller stepped out of the hospital's back entrance into the fading afternoon light, two uniformed police officers were waiting for him. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Dale Miller, you're under arrest." The charge was filing a false police report. His narrative of a non-compliant Alistair had been officially logged, and conspiracy to commit illegal towing. The irony was palpable, almost poetic. The man who wielded authority with such casual contempt was now being subjected to it. He was turned, his hands cuffed behind his back, and placed in the back of a patrol car. He was being led away in restraints, just as he had symbolically restrained Alistair's property and freedom of movement. Alistair watched from a window in the administrative building, standing beside Jessica Riley. He felt no joy, no triumph, just a grim sense of necessity. The machine had been made to answer for its actions. The next day, CEO Thompson held a hospital-wide town hall. He announced the termination of the contract with Sterling Security Solutions and the firings of Miller and Barrows. He announced the formation of the new in-house security force and the Civilian Oversight Board. He publicly apologized to Dr. Vance, who was not present, and to the entire hospital community for the systemic failures that had allowed such injustices to occur. He announced the creation of the Restitution Fund for past victims. The news spread like wildfire. Robert Fletcher, the VP at Sterling Security, was fired by his own company within 24 hours as they scrambled to do damage control. Sterling's stock price dipped. The story was picked up by the local news, framed as a story of a hospital taking decisive action to correct a deep-seated problem. Alistair spent the rest of his leave at home. He didn't answer calls from reporters. He let Jessica and the hospital's PR department handle the public narrative. He spent his time with Evelyn. They worked in the garden. They took long walks. They cooked together. He was decompressing, letting the quiet rhythms of his home life heal the wounds of the conflict. He received a call from Eleanor Peters. "I saw the news," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, profound satisfaction. "You did it, Doctor. You really did it. After all these years." "We did it, Mrs. Peters," Alistair corrected her. "Your archive was the key." He also received an email from Sarah Jenkins. It was short and to the point. "Thank you, Dr. Vance. I feel proud to be a nurse at this hospital today." On the 20th day of his leave, Alistair Vance drove his own car to Unity General. It was a cool, clear morning. He listened to Bach on the way. He pulled into the parking garage and drove to the second level. He backed into his spot. The brass plaque was there, gleaming. It seemed to shine a little brighter. As he got out of his car, a new security guard approached him. She was a middle-aged black woman with a professional but warm demeanor. Her uniform was different, a new design for the in-house team. "Good morning, Dr. Vance," she said with a respectful nod. "Welcome back." "Good morning," Alistair replied, a genuine smile touching his lips. "It's good to be back." He walked through the hospital halls. The atmosphere felt different, lighter. People greeted him with a new level of respect, of admiration. He wasn't just the chief of surgery anymore. He was the man who had stood up to the machine and won. He was a symbol of the hospital's renewed commitment to its own values. His final act before returning to his duties was to visit Eleanor Peters. He brought her a bouquet of flowers from his own garden. They sat in her living room, the now empty Injustice archive box sitting on a nearby shelf like a retired trophy. "I've been asked to co-chair the new Civilian Oversight Board," she told him, a twinkle in her eye. "Seems I'm not as retired as I thought." "They couldn't have chosen a better person," Alistair said. "And you," she said, "you're going back to saving lives." "Yes," he said, "I am." That evening, he was at home, sitting on the back porch with Evelyn, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass. He was wearing his scrubs, having come straight from a late consultation. He had his 21st day of leave remaining, an unused victory lap he had decided not to take. The work was calling. Evelyn handed him a glass of iced tea. Their hands touched. It was the same simple gesture of connection they had shared at the kitchen table on the worst night of the ordeal. But now, it felt different. It was a gesture of peace, of shared triumph. "It's over," she said softly. "No," Alistair said, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. "It's just the beginning." He thought of the new security guard, the look of pride on her face. He thought of Sarah Jenkins, who would become a nurse in a hospital that was a little bit safer, a little bit more just, because of what they had done. He thought of Marcus Green and Maria Flores, who would receive a check and an apology, a small measure of restitution for an old wound. Justice was not a destination. It was a practice, a discipline, like surgery, like life. You showed up every day, you did the work, you stayed calm under pressure, and you never, ever gave up on the patient. In this case, the patient had been the soul of his hospital, and it was going to make a full recovery. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.